Actually, I like this industry. I like what I do. I actually like making circuit boards. I actually even like running an etcher, so I'm a little bit of an odd person. But I guess what we're going to talk about is transitioning from a rigid market to a flex market from a manufacturing standpoint, and how the organization changes to accommodate that transition. So, just a brief summary of Saturn Electronics, the rigid shop. Like Mike said, we used to be a high volume. We were actually automotive, and 2000 is typically the peak year for North American board manufacturers. And you can see that we took our lumps. But since then, we've grown. We've actually been breaking records. Last year was a record year, and this year looks to be another record year, despite my efforts to actually turn down sales by 10% just so we could retrench. So the question comes up, well, how did you get there? Well, for us, in our business, it was about who do we want to become. We know we couldn't stay the same. They say there's, in addition to death and taxes, the only other guarantee is change. So what we decided to do is hold our production quality standards, basically act like a production house, but not go after volume production. Bolt on additional certifications and then offer to customers a wide volume or range of volume and technology. Small quick turns to production quick turns to even production volumes if they wanted to pay us to do it. But it took a lot of change, both in terms of your process, your equipment, your systems, but mentality and management and how you go after that. And the other thing was investment. That's one thing that's lacking that I see in North America is investment into your facility. And it takes a lot and it shows a lot. It takes quite a large percentage of your earnings to reinvest, to keep continuing, to keep your capabilities up. And it shows a lot to customers when you're actually investing in yourself. It shows that you're a long-term player. So, as far as board houses go, it's up to them how they run their own business. But this is how we did it, and it seems to have worked. So, when you have a good success story, it makes sense to expand upon it, which is why I got into the flex market, which is also why I lost about half my hair over the last year. So, what was this shop? It was a company called Proto Circuits, and they were established in 1978. I do believe they were one of the largest flex shops in North America in the 80s at one point. Problem is, their management chose to go a different way. Since 1997, maybe even before, I'm just hearing folklore, but there's zero investment. In fact, maybe opposite of zero investment, where they were selling off equipment, whether it's to raise cash or just reduce capacity. No sales force, so there was no market presence. Few new customers within the last 10 years, so they were very set with a comfortable small customer base, but that translates into high risk. And like any forward-looking company, they decided to drop all of their certifications over so many years. So it was probably one of the toughest turnarounds I've worked on. But at least it's in an extension of what markets we were already in. So on the surface, it looked like it was going to be a little bit easier. So the challenges that I started running into. I purchased it in August 2010. So just quick overview, looking around. Well, with a tight customer base, they somehow convinced these customers to design around their own weaknesses. They had pad sizes you could drive a semi-truck through. So nobody worried about registration, nobody worried about really tightening up the process. But they had good quality of, well, yeah, in one way that's true, but they weren't being challenged. This led to loose systems. It was tribal knowledge going around in the shop. We've been doing it this way for so many years. Why do you want to change things? Why should I write things down? Pretty soon it gets to be because I told you so. And sometimes you just have to, use the stick or the carrot. being a smaller and smaller facility, they were less on the radar of their vendors, so they were really being neglected. They never had any tech support. I believe that as soon as I bought the shop, some of our vendors who are here, DuPont, OMG, Inselectro, they actually started showing up and almost gave people a heart attack because they hadn't seen a vendor for 10 years. And I rely heavily on vendors. They're my eyes into the market. They help me out when I'm running into manufacturing challenges, and somehow these guys got away for 10 years without seeing a face, which leads to a high cost structure. And you combine that with the lack of a management structure, and you definitely do not have a winner on your hands. So our job was to fix that. So it's been about 15, 16 months, maybe more if my math is wrong. So within 14 months, as of December, I believe, they were finally profitable. So in my mind, since I was writing the checks for the negative balances, it seemed like a long time. But from what I hear, it's a fairly quick turnaround. They're gone from producing lower layer counts to 10 plus layers, rigid flex sequential lamb builds. They're actually doing pretty amazing stuff with 2 mil line and spacing on outer layers plated through vias, and really it's much different. So we're going after the certs to rebuild this into a real company, and so that didn't really come easy. And I'll kind of go through the steps. Like anybody else would have to do is evaluate what's your starting point. If you're a board builder and you're a rigid shop and you want to get into the flex market, where are you at? Are you just a standard 2 to 6 layer lower to medium technology shop, or are you already into the blind and buried HDI advanced technologies? It makes a big difference, especially in your tooling, in your setups, things like that. And then identify your transferable skills. What are you really good at, and how can that apply to this new market that you're getting into? So at least in ours, we have done a lot of work at Saturn in improving our capabilities and quality, whether it came to imaging, drilling, plating, you name it. Those are things that we could transfer into it, and some things we had to learn new. I wasn't used to so many tooling holes, for example. I wasn't used to so many multiple lamb cycles. Those guys were. It's the daily basis for them. So personally, I had to go through quite a bit of learning. So after we identified them, we started, going through everything. So first, when you're a rigid guy, rigid flex, there's a lot of mystery surrounding it. A lot of us don't get into it, never have tried it. So you start looking at the myths that are involved. Like there's black magic. You almost have a warlock creating circuit boards over there. You hear that, you can't build it because the materials are just too difficult to handle. You'll never get it through your lines. And registration, well, it's hard enough to register a rigid board. Look at these, it's like walking around with wet noodles. You'll never register them. So those are the myths that I was, believing when I got into the business. So then there's the truths. They're kind of the same. So it was a matter of finding out, what's the really the guts and facts behind those myths. So you find out that a lot of them are kind of true, but it's now you just got to boil it down to a translation. So what is black magic? It's nothing but experience and learning. So if you don't have experience, you learn it. Pretty simple. We all have to do that as we go on with our lives and as we're advancing forward. So it's a matter of learning, different stack-ups, different material types. With the rigid, it's like, there's FR4 and ITG FR4. And with flex, there's just a whole slew of options for you. So it took me a while to learn even just the little naming conventions, things like that. And then different methods of production. Multiple lamb cycles, laminating with holes cut out in the board. It was foreign to me. So, the other myths, that materials are difficult to handle. Sure, yeah, you're, in the rigid world, 4 mil, 5 mil cores that are rigid, they pose a challenge. In their world, daily basis, they're running 1 to 3 mil flexible cores through lines. they overcame the challenges. Any rigid board house should be able to overcome them. You could either work your way out of it or buy your way out of it, with different equipment and automation and so forth. So that, I don't think, is something that you would say that would keep me out of the market. So, when it comes to registration, we all know how designers, take into account our troubles when they're designing a board. No, they don't. So you're doing a lot of extra work. So the rigid flex guys, they do a lot of extra work when it comes to tooling, to be able to counteract the design challenges that are always thrown at you. I think tooling, first of all, is not transferable between a rigid house and a rigid flex house. And I'll caveat that by saying a standard technology rigid house. So, and it's a matter of learning the materials. Number one, it seems like flex has no grain; it almost squishes out everywhere. However, that shouldn't scare anyone away. Everything is predictable. Again, it's learning. It's learning and adapting. The biggest problem, I think, is the change management in terms of how you're going to change your overall system as opposed to build a single circuit board. Anybody can build a circuit board. So, what our idea was to extract the better parts of the rigid system when it comes to mentality towards automation, quality control verifications, sales service, and quick turnaround offerings, which we don't see in the flex market as being a priority. It seems like the flex guys are busy. In the rigid world, we compete with everyone. It's a very tough market. Flex world, I like it a little bit because it seems like the customers are more hungry for attention in that market. So what we're talking about is tailoring your organization. So equipment-wise, you can use standard equipment. It's not that big of a deal, but you might have to retool a little bit. You might have to do a little bit extra work, or you could just buy your way out of it. That's easy too. You just have to have a lot of money. So regardless how you go about it, it can be done. There's not a lot of work involved into changing over the equipment side, as long as you invest enough time, I guess. So, the general workforce, operators. Operators are always a challenge. In a rigid environment, at least from our mentality, was what's your production rate? What's your panels per hour? And they're used to punching buttons on a machine and getting the panels to the next process as quickly as possible. I found that in the rigid flex market, it's not so much. You can't have an operator just be an operator and rely on the subsequent inspection process to filter out bad parts. Throughput is great for cost, but it means nothing if whatever you're outputting is junk. So what we're relying on is continuous training. All the way from the process engineers down to the operator. Engineering reviews for new part numbers. We find those to be paramount, especially with complex builds. In the rigid world, create a traveler and throw it out to the floor and it just seems to run on its own. Discussion of yield loss. True root cause analysis. In the rigid world, we really like making Pareto charts, and it makes us feel so good that, we found out why this part was bad. Often we miss the next step of what do we do to prevent it the next time, but the chart makes us feel really good. In the rigid flex world, it's paramount that you perform the true root cause analysis for your failures because of the cost. The cost in the rigid world is significantly less than in the flex world. These materials are sometimes 5-10x per sheet, the cost. So not only do you want to make sure you prevent it going forward, whatever that issue was, but you got to make sure your operators are aware of the cost of each panel. Every time they make a movement, they really have to show care for that product. So, as someone told me, I think it was one of my customers, they said, operators gravitate towards doing one of two things. Either what you pay them to do, and not hourly wage, but something bonus-wise, or what's easier. And I'm finding that everybody just goes to what's easier. So that's part of that education process. You make it not so easy for them to not care about that work. So, in a rigid shop, when it comes to management, we've been pretty much beat up on the rigid side for many years. We're up against hundreds of other domestic shops. We're up against overseas shops that are dipping into lower volumes and quicker turns. And we're up against many brokers that are out in the market that are board suppliers as well. So our mentality has always been to minimize our costs, have minimal engineering, reduce training initiatives. Just, if there's such a thing as efficiency in training, we're the kings of it. We'll get some operator pumping out panels within a couple of weeks and say that they're certified. And it's really what we're doing is teaching them how to do the job. And we're not taking that time to teach them what does that job mean? Where do you fit in this whole sequence of processes, and what's the importance of your job? And again, throughput. So this is the areas where I think management themselves need to pull almost a complete 180 in terms of the way they think about operating a business. And I was talking to someone yesterday, and we were almost at the conclusion where it's almost impossible for a rigid shop to become a flex shop. But I do think it's possible. I do. But it has to start with management. You got to have management support. You got to have management support, financial and organizational support for continuous process engineering, getting more out of each process, getting higher capabilities, getting better yields, workmanship. We all will want to say, oh yeah, the workmanship's paramount, but then we end up relying on IPC A600 to see, this scratch is acceptable and you should take it, customer, versus in the rigid flex world, workmanship plays a huge role, huge. And at least what I found out was the mentality of our worker level was it needs to look good, not just work well. And that translates to higher yields overall and capability to do higher technologies. And again, forget about throughput. Sacrifice throughput for better yield. What's the point of having double the production rate if you have half the quality, half the yield? So that's something that, in my mind, was a huge change. I'm used to cranking out over 1,000 to 2,000 panels a day through any given process. Here, I'm happy if we crank out 20 panels a day, but they're 20 good panels and generally 20 more expensive panels. So the dollars per operator is actually higher. So that helps me, deal with the fact that we're not having like race car style yields. So as far as process engineering, if a rigid shop were to get into the rigid flex market, you would want to ensure that you spend adequate time on drill quality. These are definitely different materials. They often are hybrid laminations and require more drill setup and engineering. Definitely more in lamination controls as well as registration of those materials. You got to put your time and resources into doing that. Making sure your system is capable to adjust to these different design stack-ups, which often translate to different process flows, and get ready for a lot of engineering on the fly. That comes in line with the extra verifications that we're doing in the rigid flex builds. You're always reacting. If something goes off center a little bit, you need to bring it back to center. And where in the rigid market, you're relying again on that whole IPC to say, oh, well, yeah, it's not center, but we're good enough. In the rigid flex world, good enough translates to yield loss down the road. So that part is engineering support. The other is workmanship. I think rigid people have to change their mentality in terms of what's acceptable. And again, promoting the workmanship means promoting operator training. That operator has to become an inspector. They have to become like the eyes of the customer. So we're talking about sacrificing throughput again. Before rigid people vomit when they hear that, it's a requirement. You have to have extra care in handling. extra process setup verifications. You don't just rely on the tooling to give you yield. You want to make sure it's doing its job. More in-process testing, and again, that operator is becoming more and more important as part of that process. So, again, going back to the throughput, this is what we're doing is changing our focus from number of panels per hour and focusing on the number of perfect panels per hour. And that's really a culmination of, you know, the training, the process engineering, and the operator training. And why do we do this? It's for the customer, because as far as I see in the flex, rigid flex world, these customers are definitely more scrutinizing than in the rigid world. And most likely they're going to be a medical or military customer. I believe that's over 80% of the market. So, you know, and the standards always come up. Well, this is a person's life at stake. Well, truly, that is a critical application. And even if the board functions properly and meets all IPC criteria, if it doesn't look right, it creates doubt. So that's where this importance in the workmanship and engineering comes into play. Because what we're doing is we're building the high reliability connections. That's it. That's our simple job. And changing that management perception, changing that management focus towards not just building good product, but good looking product, is going to be a major challenge for a lot of rigid shops. It was a challenge for me, but luckily we have a separate operation, so I don't have to create two separate rules or anything. You know, we overcome it, and we can make it there. So if there's a rigid shop that wants to transfer into a rigid flex market, I don't think it's something you dip your toes and try it out. It really will take a full top-down approach, first changing management mentality, and then getting out to the shop floor. So, yeah, that's it's basically it. It is a back-to-school process. It'll require learning not only of how to make a circuit board again, but how to manage your company.